He was known only as El Ingeniero, a man who, according to intelligence analysts, never touched cocaine, never carried a weapon, and was worth more to the Sinaloa cartel than 100 sicarios. His tools were surveyor's equipment, ventilation schematics, and a crew of miners recruited from Mexico's dying silver industry. His masterpiece ran 4,000 feet beneath the most militarized border in the Western Hemisphere, and American authorities would drive over it, walk over it, patrol directly above it for 18 months before they ever knew it existed. This is the story of how the cartel built a drug tunnel under the United States border. Not the story of a crime, but the story of a business decision, an infrastructure investment that would make any venture capitalist pause in quiet recognition. Because the tunnel beneath Otay Mesa was not an act of desperation. It was an act of patient, professional, almost mundane engineering, and understanding how it was built is the only way to understand why. Despite billions spent on border security, despite the most sophisticated surveillance technology on Earth, despite the largest interdiction apparatus ever assembled by any nation, the drugs keep coming. October 2020. Just after 4 in the morning, a Homeland Security Investigations Task Force positions itself outside a nondescript warehouse in San Diego's Otay Mesa Industrial District. The building looks like 100 others on the block. Corrugated metal walls, a loading dock, a small sign advertising a tile and flooring import company that, upon later investigation, will prove to have processed exactly 0 legitimate shipments in its 18 months of operation. The breach is quiet. Flash of credentials, bolt cutters on a padlock. Inside, the warehouse is mostly empty. Pallets of ceramic tiles, a forklift, the stale smell of concrete dust. Nothing, at first glance, worth the early morning raid. But the agents aren't looking at what's visible. They're looking for what's hidden. And behind a steel shelf stacked with sample tiles, they find it. A hydraulic door disguised as an electrical panel, flush with the wall, invisible unless you know exactly where to push. Behind that door, a shaft, 70 feet straight down, fitted with a caged elevator. And at the bottom, the entrance to a tunnel that will take these agents nearly 20 minutes to walk. What they find down there defies the Hollywood imagination of a cramped smuggling passage. This is no desperate crawlspace. The tunnel is 6 feet high, 4 feet wide, reinforced with wooden beams and concrete. It has a rail system running its entire length, fitted with electric carts to move product and personnel. It has forced air ventilation, pumping oxygen from the surface. It has high-voltage electrical lines, powering industrial lighting every dozen feet. It has a sump pump system to manage groundwater. It has, investigators will later determine, been operational for at least 6 months, running an estimated 2,000 pounds of cocaine and several hundred pounds of methamphetamine per week into the United States. When the agents emerge on the other side, they are standing in a warehouse in Tijuana, Mexico, 4,309 feet from where they started, the longest tunnel ever discovered on the southwest border. The question that haunts every investigator who walks that passage is not how the drugs moved. That part is obvious. The question is, who designs something like this? The answer begins not at the border, but 700 miles south, in the mountains of Durango and Zacatecas, Mexico's silver country. For 4 centuries, these mountains produced a significant portion of the world's precious metals. Generations of families built their lives around the mines. Fathers taught sons how to read rock, how to reinforce a shaft, how to work in darkness, how to breathe when the air grows thin. But by the early 2000s, the mines were dying. Global commodity prices collapsed. Industrial extraction moved elsewhere. The companies left. The towns emptied. And thousands of experienced miners, men with skills found nowhere else on Earth, found themselves with no work, no prospects, and families to feed. Into this void stepped the cartels, not with threats, not with guns to the head, but with something far more effective: a payroll. The offer, according to testimony from arrested tunnel workers and DEA informant debriefs, was simple. A legitimate mining job in Mexico might pay $50 a week if you could find one at all. The cartel would pay $1,500, cash, weekly, for work that was fundamentally the same work these men had done their entire lives: dig, reinforce, advance. Don't ask questions about what comes next. The psychological calculus is worth pausing on. These were not men who joined cartels to become criminals in the traditional sense. They carried no weapons. They handled no drugs. Many of them, according to investigators, genuinely compartmentalized what they were doing. They were miners. They dug tunnels. What happened to those tunnels after they walked away was someone else's concern. This rationalization, fragile as it might seem, was actively cultivated by the cartel's operational security. Tunnel crews were kept separate from trafficking crews. Diggers never met couriers. Electricians never met financiers. The man pouring concrete at 70 feet below the surface had no idea who owned the warehouse above him, had no idea what product would move through his handiwork, had no idea, in many cases, that he was even beneath American soil. Plausible deniability was built into the structure itself, and at the top of this hierarchy of compartmentalized labor sat men like El Ingeniero, the architects, the engineers, the project managers who transformed cartel money into cartel infrastructure. El Ingeniero is not a single man. He is an archetype. Intelligence analysts believe multiple individuals have held this role across various cartel operations, some with formal engineering education, some with decades of practical mining experience, some who may have worked legitimately for construction firms before being recruited into more lucrative employment. What they share is a specific skill, the ability to move Earth invisibly over months or years and emerge on the other side of the most surveilled border on the planet. To understand why someone like El Ingeniero is worth more than 100 gunmen, you need to understand the economics. Not the economics of drugs, but the economics of Earth. The math is simple. The United States consumes more illicit drugs per capita than any nation on Earth. That demand is inelastic. It does not decrease when prices rise. It does not decrease when enforcement increases. It simply persists. And as long as that demand persists, supply will find a way. For decades, that supply moved across the border through every imaginable method, hidden in vehicles, carried by foot through the desert, thrown over fences, catapulted, droned, flown in small aircraft. And as border security tightened, particularly after September 11, 2001, these methods became increasingly risky. Seizure rates rose, smugglers were arrested, product was lost. The cartel's response was not to fight this interdiction head-on, it was to go beneath it. Literally. The first major tunnel was discovered in 1990 in Agua Prieta, just across from Douglas, Arizona, a passage running beneath a legitimate drainage culvert exiting in a private home. Primitive by modern standards, but revolutionary for its time. It demonstrated a principle that would shape the next 3 decades of smuggling. The border exists only on the surface. Beneath it, sovereignty becomes abstract. After that discovery, the arms race began, and by 2020, the Otay Mesa Supertunnel represented the state of the art. The numbers tell the story. Construction cost for a tunnel of this sophistication, approximately $1 to $2 million. Labor, materials, equipment, bribes, front companies, all of it. Call it $2 million at the high end. Operational capacity, an estimated $20 to $30 million worth of product per week. Conservative estimate. Return on investment, recovered within days, possibly within a single shipment. This is not crime as desperation. This is crime as capital expenditure. The cartel understands something that their opponents often do not. Infrastructure wins. A tunnel is not an event, it is an asset, a fixed cost that generates returns for months, years, until discovery. And when one tunnel is discovered, the others remain. The investment has already paid off many times over. So how do you build 4,000 feet of tunnel without anyone noticing? The process begins long before anyone picks up a shovel. Site selection is everything. You need a terminus point in Mexico that you control absolutely, usually an industrial property in a border city, purchased through layers of shell companies operated by front businesses that maintain enough legitimate activity to avoid suspicion. You need a terminus point in the United States that meets the same criteria, with the additional challenge of doing this under the eye of American corporate transparency laws. You need both points to be within the same geological corridor, avoiding the water table, avoiding unstable soil, avoiding existing infrastructure like sewer lines and utility conduits. Otay Mesa was chosen precisely because it is boring. An industrial zone, miles of warehouses, thousands of trucks moving daily, no residential neighbors to notice unusual activity, no quiet streets where a van parked at 3 in the morning would draw attention. The very anonymity of American commercial real estate became the cartel's camouflage. The front company was established. A tile import business, just plausible enough. Lease signed, warehouse rented. Occasional pallets of product actually imported, just enough to create a paper trail. The American side was ready. In Tijuana, the mirror operation. Another warehouse, another shell company, another layer of deniability. And then the digging began. 70 feet down first. Vertical shaft. This is the most dangerous phase, the most visible. Heavy equipment moving in after dark. soil coming out in covered trucks. The shaft reinforced with steel and concrete as it descends, the elevator cage installed. Weeks of this, the most exposed the operation will ever be. And then the horizontal push, north, under the fence, under the patrol roads, under the sensors and the cameras and the billions of dollars of security infrastructure, at a pace of perhaps 6 to 10 feet per day. 12 men working in shifts around the clock. 3 crews, 8 hours each. The night shift is the heaviest when surface noise provides cover. The engineering challenges are substantial. Ventilation is the first problem. At this depth, natural oxygen is insufficient. Men will suffocate. So industrial fans are installed, pulling air from the surface, pushing it through flexible ducting that extends as the tunnel advances. Carbon dioxide monitors at the working face, regular air quality checks. Water is the second problem. Even above the main water table, groundwater seeps through rock and soil. Without management, the tunnel floods. So sump pumps are installed at intervals, running constantly, feeding drainage lines back to the vertical shaft. And then there is the problem of dirt. 4,000 feet of tunnel, 4 feet wide, 6 feet high. Do the math. That is roughly 35,000 cubic feet of soil and rock. Over 1,200 tons of earth that must be removed, transported, and disposed of without anyone asking questions. Standard procedure, according to investigators who have studied multiple tunnel operations, involves a combination of methods. Some soil is removed in trucks, under cover of darkness, dumped at construction sites where fresh earth attracts no attention. Some is mixed with legitimate construction debris and disposed of through compliant waste management contacts. Some, in longer operations, is simply compacted and stored on site, hidden in the very warehouse from which the tunnel originates. 18 months of this, 500 days of digging, reinforcing, advancing, and above them, the Border Patrol drives its trucks. The sensors log their ambient data. The surveillance cameras record nothing unusual. The most sophisticated interdiction apparatus ever built watches the surface while, 30 feet below, the tunnel inches forward. Here is the uncomfortable truth that Homeland Security officials will acknowledge only in private. Technology has not solved this problem. Ground-penetrating radar exists. It has been deployed along the border. It can detect voids in soil, in theory. In practice, its range is limited, its false positive rate is high, and the border is too long to scan comprehensively. Seismic sensors exist. They can detect digging, in theory. In practice, the Otay Mesa Industrial Zone produces so much ambient vibration from trucks and machinery that isolating tunnel activity is nearly impossible. The Otay Mesa Tunnel did produce sensor readings, faint microtremors logged at irregular intervals, always in the early morning hours. The data was flagged. Analysts reviewed it. The readings were attributed to natural ground settling, to distant traffic, to the 1,000 mundane explanations that always seem more likely than the extraordinary truth. Nearly every major tunnel discovered on the southwest border has been found not through technology, but through human intelligence. An informant, a wiretap, a courier who talks after arrest. The Otay Mesa Tunnel was no different. A separate investigation into cartel financial networks produced a cooperating witness who mentioned a warehouse. That warehouse was surveilled. That surveillance produced enough evidence for a warrant. That warrant produced the raid, 20 minutes underground. That is how long it took the agents to walk from San Diego to Tijuana. They emerged into a warehouse that Mexican authorities had, simultaneously, been coordinating to raid from the other side. The seizure was substantial: cocaine, methamphetamine, cash. But investigators knew, even as they cataloged the evidence, that they had caught only what was left. The tunnel had been operational for months. The mathematics of what had already passed through were staggering to consider. The tunnel was sealed with concrete. The warehouses were seized. The front companies were dissolved. Arrests were made. Lower-level operatives, tunnel workers, warehouse managers. Charges were filed. And El Ingeniero, the man whose vision had made it all possible, was never identified, never arrested. Standard cartel operational security suggested he had never set foot in either warehouse. Once construction was complete, he had likely already moved on, already surveying the next site, already calculating the next route beneath the earth. This is the pattern. Tunnel discovered, tunnel sealed, tunnel replaced. The infrastructure persists because the economics demand it. For every tunnel found, intelligence analysts estimate several remain operational. The interdiction rate, even optimistically calculated, captures a fraction of what moves beneath the border. The cartels treat these losses as a cost of doing business, built into their financial projections, a line item in an invisible budget. Billions of dollars have been spent fortifying the United States-Mexico border. Walls have been built. Technology has been deployed. Thousands of agents have been hired. And the drugs keep coming. The tunnels keep appearing. The engineers keep engineering. This is not a story about criminal genius, though there is genius in it. It is not a story about law enforcement failure, though there are failures to examine. It is a story about economics, about what happens when you attempt to prohibit a commodity that millions of people wish to consume, about the mathematical certainty that, given sufficient demand and sufficient profit margin, supply will innovate its way around any obstacle. The tunnel beneath Otay Mesa was not an act of desperation. It was not the work of desperate men fleeing poverty. It was a calculated investment made by an organization that understands infrastructure, that understands return on investment, that understands that patience and professionalism will defeat surveillance every time. The men who dug it are still out there. Some arrested, yes, but the skills remain. The recruiting pipeline from the dying mines remains. The economic incentive remains. And somewhere, right now, beneath the most heavily guarded border in the Western Hemisphere, there is likely another tunnel advancing, inch by inch, day by day, invisible to the satellites and the sensors and the billions of dollars watching from above. The question that remains is not whether we can stop this. Decades of evidence suggest we cannot, not through interdiction, not through enforcement, not through any strategy that leaves demand unaddressed and prohibition economics intact. The question is whether we are willing to ask what it would mean to try something different, whether we are capable of examining the fundamental assumptions that have produced this endless, unwinnable arms race beneath the earth, or whether we will simply keep building walls on the surface while the tunnels multiply below, a monument to the stubborn refusal to confront what the economics have been telling us all along. The drugs keep moving, the tunnels keep growing, and somewhere, a man called El Ingeniero is already planning his next masterpiece. Share your thoughts below.